Hey everybody, it's Pam Atwood from Atwood Dementia Group, and a lot of you have reached out to me after the news yesterday released by New England Journal of Medicine and the pharmaceutical company Eisai with regards to lecanemab, which is the new next generation Alzheimer's drug that we have a lot of cautious optimism about. So I thought I would share with you some of my thoughts and my ideas. I am not a researcher, I am not a scientist. Although I do study and look at data a lot, it's not what I do professionally. One of the things that I always coach my families and my clients to remember is to read research carefully. Actually, before I get into that, let me point out one other quick thing. I can't wait to be out of a job. And I mean that with all sincerity. Alzheimer's runs in my family. I would love not to have to live under that kind of cursed umbrella. And those of you who know me know that I always say, if I do get it, then I will make sure that it is something that we learn to live with a good life, not just a life that is filled with terrible regret and sadness and depression. And my husband and I have committed our careers to making sure that we can improve the quality of life for those living with dementia, both the person diagnosed and their families. So that said, I can't wait to be out of a job. The cautious optimism comes from a point of fact that I've been in the field now for 30 years, and this isn't the first time I've been in this position, including with Eisai. So many years ago when we were looking at Aricept back in, 1994, and we were so excited that this medication was coming out and it was so groundbreaking, et cetera. And then eventually we had Eisai come out with, and Eisai and Pfizer, of course, were the originators of Aricept, donepezil at the time. The Eisai team was also looking at vaccine. I want to say that was in the early 2000s, 2001s, and it was really hopeful. And a lot of us were saying 18 months we're looking at until we have a real effective disease-modifying intervention here. And it didn't pan out. Because the more they studied it, the more they realized people in France, one of the studies internationally, were dying. Not a good outcome. So here we are again, and we are again looking at what appears to be a disease-modifying treatment. This is not like Aricept, Exelon, Razidine. Those are the brand names. I mean, donepezil, rivastigmine, and I don't remember what Razidine's is. Galantamine? I think it's galantamine. Regardless, those medications really don't change the progression of the plaques and tangle process. They help the healthy cells communicate a little bit longer. So lecanemab appears to be clearing out some of the amyloid. The original research that was done on its kind of sister preparation, Aduhelm or adunimab, that medication was not as effective as lecanemab appears to be. So let me start by saying, from what I've researched, and this includes, some of the abstracts and information that was sent out from the New England Journal, and that includes experts right here in Connecticut. Dr. Chris Van Dyke down at Yale was a part of that project and was one of the multi-center sites that participated in this research. So the information is done. I'll pause again. Part of my optimism is because I know some of the players, and I know that these are legitimate scientists and solid researchers. I am always cautious whenever I hear about a research study that is primarily funded by a pharmaceutical company. But these are big bucks, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we always want to be cautious, really cautious. And that was one of the first criticisms of lecanemab, is that this is a study that was really funded by the researchers, the pharmaceutical company. So can we really trust it? When I hear Chris Van Dyke, I think, yeah, we can trust it. So That said, some of the research that I did to prepare for today, it includes reports from the journal Science, from CNN, from Popular Media, from a number of other, information and postings on clinicaltrials.gov and a number of different sites. So while I'm not an expert and I certainly don't know a lot about this research in particular, I am an informed reader. So, things that we can be excited about. It does appear to be a disease modifying medication, that this is something that is really promising. Some of the things to be cautious about. Number one, this is not an easy med. This medication is an IV infusion and it has to be done every 2 weeks. Now, we don't know because this was an 18-month trial. Does that mean that it stops working after that? Or are there some residual effects? Or is this something that if you get this medication, are you going to have that every 2 weeks for the rest of the course of your illness? We don't know that yet, so far as I understand from my research, my data gathering. That's a lot. That's pretty intensive, especially because this was research done on people with early stage mild cognitive impairment or early stage cognitive impairment. So if you're thinking that, the disease process lasts, from, depending on what study you read, 5 to 20 years, is this going to be 20 years of infusions potentially? We don't know. So that's one thing. Number two, this is not a cheap intervention. This is very expensive. ASI came in originally for the Aduhelm or the Adunimab with a price point of $56,000 per injection. And that was immediately once they went to CMS, I believe they were cutting it in half, is my understanding. So they're looking at lecanemab as being between, say, $9,000 and $35,000 per infusion. That's a huge expense. Even if the FDA approves it, and they're under a lot of pressure to approve it, then we don't know that CMS or Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services will approve reimbursement. That's a challenge and a problem. And there are all kinds of social problems with that as well regarding access and equity and all kinds of other issues. So there's a lot still that we don't know. Furthermore, we still have to have a lot of other people weigh in on the science. So the scientists who do it, although they may be wonderful, trustworthy, affiliated with wonderful, reputable centers, it still needs to be evaluated on many, many levels. And even what they did report in the New England Journal, this is something that needs to be evaluated on a larger scale. Lastly, the other thing that I wanted to point out is that this is not a hugely effective intervention. The intervention, number one, had somewhat limited improvements. My understanding is that there were improvements on a clinical cognitive rating scale of 1 point. While that might be scientifically, clinically significant, those of us who live with someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, that's not very much. Without something like Aricept, donepezil, or some other medication, we expect a 2 to 4 point decline on someone's cognitive testing each year. That's a lot of decline, but a 1 point improvement is good because it's not a decline, but it's not a huge, this is not something somebody's going to take and then all of a sudden they have no more Alzheimer's. If it does clear out the amyloid and make it so that a person's disease stays stable until we can find a cure, I am all for that, especially because that could be me. I'm not saying I'm not optimistic. I just want us to make sure that we're not getting overly excited about this. Lastly, we do need to recognize that there have been 2 people who participated in the trials. This was reported in the journal Science that did die. So one of the things that somebody, I can't remember which respondent to that pointed out, this may have been from the CNN, that although that's true, it wasn't clinically significant compared to the control group. So while it's definitely connected to the engagement or involvement in the clinical trial, it may not be significant different from the control group. So I'm not sure what that means, but that's another thing that they're going to have to study. All right, so that's it. Research update in under 10 minutes. I'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks. Alexa off.